Hey, America's the greatest country in the world. Welcome to our special, The Decision, the Veep Stakes. Now, listen, I have a pet peeve that has turned into a rule. I'm against all intentionally misspelled words, and I'm against combining two words into, in this case, VP and sweepstakes to Veep Stakes. I'm out. No more. So we're not going to call it. We're going to call it The Decision. Who is Donald Trump going to pick to be his vice president? So we've broken it down to a couple categories here. We're going to talk to Lara Trump. We have two people who are going to defend two of the top candidates, and then we're going to end with Dr. Ben Carson, who's one of these candidates as well. We'll get to them in a minute. First, let's talk about these senators. Tim Scott from South Carolina. He's been traveling with Donald Trump for a while now. There was a Harvard poll that asks people which vice presidential contender would make you more likely or less likely to vote for Trump. And the only candidate in the list that they had, which is not the list that we're going to talk about here, but in the list that they gave of names, he was the only candidate that has a higher, more likely to vote than less likely to vote difference. So 25% of people said they'd be more likely to vote for Trump if Tim Scott were the VP. 19% said less likely, for a 6% gain. And no other person on that survey had any gain at all. Some were a loss indeed. So that is, do we have a clip of Tim Scott and Donald Trump here?
I have to say, this is in a very positive way. Tim Scott, he has been much better for me than he was for himself.
So, Tim Scott, I think he needs to be near the top of the list. Marco Rubio from Florida. I haven't heard the name Marco Rubio in a while now, but he's sort of jumped out here on the scene. Now remember, this is Marco Rubio, Gang of Eight Marco Rubio from not that long ago, and here he is on Meet the Press talking about mass deportations, agreeing with Donald Trump.
To deport the more than 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country, it would be the largest deportation operation in American history. Do you support that plan?
11 million. That's an outdated. That was the number 10 years ago. We're talking upwards of 20, 25, maybe 30 million. Well, There's been almost 10 million people that have entered this country unlawfully in the last 3 years.
To the question, would you support it?
The number varies big time. I mean, it's another 9 to 10 million people just in the last 3 years. The answer to your question is yes. We cannot absorb 25, 30 million people who entered this country illegally. They're here illegally. What country on earth would tolerate that? We don't even know who most of these people are. They talk about vetting them with what? They're coming from nations that don't even have document systems in many cases. Yes, we are going to have to do something, unfortunately. We're going to have to do something dramatic to remove people from this country that are here illegally, especially people we know nothing about.
That may be the first clip you've heard of Marco Rubio in a while. You're like, wait a second, that didn't sound like the Marco Rubio from 2016 when he said it's very impractical to deport that many people. But in his defense, he says, well, back in 2016, there was like 10 million people, illegals, and they were here for a decade, and it would be very difficult. Now we got 30 million people, and most of them only been here for a couple of years, so things are very, very different. But the point is, you see him getting out in the scene here in the front, and I think pretty obviously trying to vie for that VP slot. He's gunning for it. Then J.D. Vance. I think J.D. Vance is one of the top frontrunners, maybe in the lead, because he believes in the movement. And I think that's one of the most important things that Donald Trump is looking for, or should be looking for. Not just someone who's there for career ascension, for a career bump, but for someone who's really there for the MAGA movement. Because you may think, well, hold on, what does Donald Trump care about that? He's just one term and then he's done. So what does Trump care about? Well, this is his legacy. MAGA is his legacy beyond even when he's no longer president anymore. So Trump needs not just a Republican, but a MAGA believer, someone who can carry on the MAGA movement beyond 2028. And I think J.D. Vance, maybe he's one of the top guys who could do that. Those are the senators that I think are in the running. Marco Rubio, Tim Scott, J.D. Vance. Congress people, there's a lot of them are trying to get favor with Trump, right? They're showing up at the court hearings and stuff like that. I don't think any of them will be a congressional pick, maybe a little too small ball for Trump to pick a congressperson. Maybe Elise Stefanik from New York, maybe. She was asked about her past negative comments about Trump.
Leadership. Want to talk to you about the Veep stakes. Your name is continually thrown out as being on the short list potentially, that this trip may be part of an audition. The New York Times had a lengthy piece where they talk about your transformation, they say, from somebody who was not supportive of President Trump to somebody who is full-throatedly supportive of him. They say you called him a whack job at one point.
Well, Shannon, it's a disgrace that you would quote the New York Times with nameless, faceless,
but they're quoting your
sources.
Friends, so I'm giving you a chance to respond to
Shannon,
that.
Shannon, they're not quoting my friends. Those names are not included because they are false smears. I was attacked.
To be
as the
fair,
only
there are a number
Republican
of names of people. Just to be fair, there are a number of names of people who are quoted in the article.
Shannon, let me
people can read
correct
it for themselves.
This is a false smear, and let me tell you a fact, Shannon. In 2016, I was attacked as the only elected Republican from the Northeast who voted for President Trump. Democrats spent hundreds of thousands of dollars attacking me for that fact. So to say that I didn't support him is just false.
All right, so she's tough. Which leads us into some of the governors. We'll stick with women. Sarah Sanders, governor of Arkansas. Tough, worked with Trump as a press secretary. If he picked Sarah Sanders, it wouldn't be picking a woman, or it would be picking a woman, but it wouldn't be for the sake of pandering, right? Sarah Sanders, right? It's not like, oh, we got to get the woman vote. It's like, no, I'm going to pick someone who's tough, and Sarah Sanders would be that person. Also, Kristi Noem, governor of South Dakota, she had a chance, but then she just committed the classic political blunder of admitting that she shot her dog in the head. You know, but like, again, add her to the list of people who have admitted to doing that before, you know. There was talk of Nikki Haley. No chance of that one. The governor of North Dakota, Doug Burgum. We have a guest coming up in a little bit who thinks Burgum is the man. Burgum keeps hanging around. Remember him from... I've never seen that guy in my life. If that guy walked in my living room, I'd say, what are you doing here, stranger person? Like, who? Doug Burgum. Remember, he was last place during the Republican debates. The only reason he got on the debate stage is because you needed 40,000 unique donors to get on the debate stage. So he, because he's a billionaire, this is a true story, he gave people $20 gift cards if they donated $1 to his campaign. So it cost him, X amount of money, but he got on the debate stage, and now here he is hanging around, palling around with Trump, maybe even getting the VP slot because of it. It's a pretty good return on your investment. He's a billionaire. Trump needs money, and Trump likes billionaires. So maybe this whole thing wasn't just to get, or maybe it was. I don't think he ever thought he'd be president, but to get that cabinet spot, maybe even VP might work. We're on the governor's list right here. How about a name I haven't heard in a little bit here? Ron DeSantis. Ronnie boy. They have buried the hatchet. They met a couple weeks ago, and I maybe even used those words, bury the hatchet. Back in the running for VP. I think we've all forgotten that primary even happened, right? Did they bury that hatchet deep enough? There was a Harvard poll, 23% of Republicans want Ron DeSantis to be the VP. Next closest after DeSantis was Vivek at 13%, which leads us to the group of outsiders. Vivek Ramaswamy. I don't think he'd be the VP pick. I think he's better served doing something else. Got to keep in mind, you are in line to be president right away, right? Anything goes wrong. I don't know if he's quite ready for that. But listen, great role as a press secretary, something in the MAGA world. Maybe they make up something different for him where like his job is literally to go out into neighborhoods and communities and speak the MAGA movement into different places. So I don't know if it's the VP slot, but a lot of people would love that to be. Another outsider that's been talked about is Tucker Carlson. I'm a big fan of Tucker. It'll be very entertaining. That's at the very least. Ben Carson. I'm going to talk to him coming up in a little bit. Trump's longest serving cabinet member. Clearly have a level of respect for each other. He's going to join us again at the end of today's show. We'll ask him if he would take the job. So this leads me to I think that's the list. I think that's the list of front runners. I don't know anyone else who would come from outside of that pack. But leave it to Trump to think of someone who would be. But it leads me to my final point before we get to our wonderful guests. We're going to talk to Lara Trump and others. By the way, I'd love your pick too. Slater Radio on Twitter and Instagram. That's my handle, Slater Radio. Who do you think would be your favorite pick for vice president? And who is your like? No, please do not pick this person. Pick this person. I've always said, I think, as I've said this for many, many years, I think the candidate should pick everyone. Like pick the whole group, pick the whole cabinet. give everyone something to be excited about, right? Pick your press secretary, pick your secretary of state, pick the whole thing, right? That way, someone who's maybe like, oh, I want to vote for Trump because he's mean. That person who's on the fence, they can be like, well, I don't like Trump that much, but I love Sarah Sanders in that position, and I think Vivek would be great over there, and DeSantis to be the head of going after the FBI or the head of this, or like whatever. Give people something to grab onto. I've always liked that idea. It never goes anywhere, and no one likes it. Anyway, who's my pick or my prediction? I'll say it. I don't want to go on the record saying this would be my pick. But this is my prediction. If I had to put money on this, and maybe I'm just picking this person as my prediction because it's a little bit outside, and maybe there's a good return on this gamble. And by the way, if it's not this person, forget we ever had this conversation. And if it is, record this and let's play it back over and over so you don't forget what a political genius I ever am. Here's my prediction. Now don't come at me with oh, Slater, he's terrible. I don't care. That's not my point. My prediction. Mike Pompeo. Now, listen, I'm not saying he's the best person in the world. He's not my best friend. But I think he checks a lot of boxes. Former head of the CIA, Trump's Secretary of State, sharp, smart, put together, says the right things, stays out of the spotlight, stays out of trouble, can hold his own. Right? That's what I mean by sharp. Can hold his own when people ask him questions. He's not, he could step in the job on day one if needed. He's a real believer, Christian. Former congressman from Kansas. I think he's central casting, right? I think that's one of the big reasons why Trump chose Mike Pence. He just looks like a guy who would be, he looks like a vice president. And I think Mike Pompeo looks like a vice president well. So that is my prediction. Again, if I'm wrong, forget all about it. If I'm right, never forget it. All right, so there we go. That's what we got. I think that's a pretty good lay of the land. So Dr. Ben Carson coming up at the end of the show. We have two guests who are going to make the case for J.D. Vance and Doug Burgum coming up. Right now, though, Lara Trump will ask his daughter-in-law what Donald Trump is looking for out of a vice president, right here on the First TV. Hey, welcome back to the show, The Decision. Let's kick things off with Donald Trump's daughter-in-law, but more importantly here, head or co-chair of the RNC, Miss Lara Trump. Lara, how you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much.
A pleasure. Great to talk to you. So let's talk first from a let's put the you know the guy part aside. Let's put the daughter-in-law part. Let's do RNC co-chair. What are people looking for in a vice president generally?
Well, look, I think that people want someone who they know can carry on the mantle of the America First, Make America Great Again movement, right? And I think whenever you look at someone like Donald Trump, you have to remember that, first of all, he changed politics in general. Since the day that he came down the golden escalator in Trump Tower, June 16th, 2015, politics have never been the same. People are engaged, they're paying attention, and he really has changed our party. Look at the way he's been able to expand this party and bring in people like blue-collar workers. Right now, you see support going up for Donald Trump in spaces like with the African-American community, with Hispanic voters, with young voters. So when you look at this party, it's a party that has ultimately changed because of him. And so I think whenever you're considering someone to be your vice president, obviously that's a person who has to be ready day one to serve as president should anything, God forbid, happen to the president. But you also want someone who you can look towards the future with. And I think a lot of times you tap a VP in the future to potentially run as president. And certainly the momentum we have in this party, we want to see continue, not just here in 2024 and for the 4 years that Donald Trump will be president, which I truly believe we will see happen, but for years and years after that. So I think it is the number one thing that people want to see, someone who has his policies, who has a lot of common sense ways of looking at things like he does, and who really can carry that on into the future.
I want to get on that point, but you mentioned how the party has changed so much. Just this morning, I was talking to one of the Republicans running for Senate Christine, running for Senate in New Jersey. And we're just talking about the polls in New Jersey and how Trump lost New Jersey by 16, I think, and Cory Booker back in 2021 by 17, that Senate race there. And the latest poll, which was like 2 months ago, had Trump only down by 6. Like, are we
Right.
really talking about potential Trump victories in New York and New Jersey?
We are talking about expanding the map, Mike. I mean, there's no doubt about it. You know, you probably just heard about a week ago, we are now talking about adding to our battleground states, Minnesota and Virginia. I'll tell you, we're also looking at states like New Hampshire. We had a poll earlier this week where you see a dead heat between Joe Biden and Donald Trump in the Granite State. That's amazing. You know, that's a state a Republican hasn't won in like 6 election cycles. That it speaks volumes. So yes, we are seriously looking at a changed map. Think back to 2016. Think about the state of Michigan. No one was even looking out for Michigan in 2016, and in came Donald Trump. And I think you have a situation right now across the country where people are quite frankly fed up, where people who maybe fell for the trap of, oh, jazz hands, here's the old nice man, Joe Biden, dignity back to the White House, Scranton Joe, all that nonsense. They don't care about that anymore because they know they've been fooled and they know they can't pay their bills. They know they can't go to the grocery store and actually buy what they need for their families. They know they can't fill up their gas tank. They know that we have a fully open southern border and it feels like we're on the verge of World War III. They know who had that in the complete opposite direction, and it was Donald Trump. So when you go across this country, I was in California all last weekend. I got to tell you something. People are sick and tired of it. They are ready to come out and vote for Donald Trump. And these are voters he did not have in 2020. So yes, I think you are going to see a changed, much redder map come November 5th, 2024.
Scranton Joe. Ridiculous.
Yeah.
Okay, back
Please.
to VP. So tell me about your father-in-law's discernment when it comes to knowing the difference between someone who is career hopping, right, who's always wanted that VP spot their whole life, and this might be their chance, versus the someone who truly understands that this is a movement and they want to be, a part of it for the movement's sake and not for their own. How do you know the difference?
Well, Donald Trump is the ultimate negotiator. And to be a good negotiator, you have to be able to read people. And he's really been able to do that his entire life. I mean, if you look at his company, if you look at the Trump organization, some of the top executives in the Trump organization started out as doormen, as drivers, as security guards, but he could read them so well. And he saw something in them that maybe they didn't even see in themselves. And because of that, he gave them the opportunity to rise through the ranks of the company and ultimately end up where they are today. And I really think it speaks to his discernment, as you're asking, in terms of people who he can peg for certain positions and he knows will do those positions well. I think it's no different when it comes to choosing a vice president. Look, there's a lot you can say about Mike Pence in terms of the end of his tenure as vice president. But when you look at the way he served in that position for the 4 years that they were in office together, he was really a great vice president. And he was actually the great counterbalance that I think was needed for that moment to Donald Trump and to his big personality, which obviously sometimes rubs people the wrong way. He had the counterbalance of Mike Pence. I think we're in a different space right now. And I think that he's looking for different qualities in a VP at this very moment. But I think it's that ability to read people that I really do believe he's always had. And I don't think you can create or you can teach someone. I think it's innate. I think he was born with it, that I think will ultimately lead him to choose who he will choose for his running mate. And I think it will be the best person for the job.
Yeah, so listen, you've mentioned many ways, and we all know that Trump has totally changed the game in every way. So the old school thinking was, we want to win the minority vote, so we got to have a black vice president. Or we want to win the women vote, we need a woman president. Is that still a thing? Is that somewhat of a factor? Does the suburban housewife going to feel way better if there's like a nice guy who's vice president as opposed to mean old Trump? Is that into his thinking at all or no?
Yeah, identity politics does not play into it. I think that people view that as pandering. I think it's insulting. I think it's the exact opposite of what you would want to do to choose someone to run for a position like this. Certainly the Democrats have cornered the market on identity politics. Joe Biden was happy to tell us the only reason he chose his vice president, Kamala Harris, not based on the fact that she could be great in that position and execute it well and she was the best person for that job. No, based on how she looked. And I think it's insulting as a woman that is our first female vice president and that she was chosen only because she's a woman and only because she's a minority, per Joe Biden's own words. No, I don't think it factors in at all. I think what people have seen with Donald Trump is he is a straight shooter. He will tell you like it is, and he will choose someone who, again, he knows can execute that position. He knows day one could be ready to serve as president and can carry on the message, the policies, and the great future vision for America that he has always had. And so that is the most important thing. When you're talking about bringing in other groups, look at the poll numbers right now. Donald Trump is blowing it out of the water. No Republican in history has polled so high with Black voters, with Hispanic voters, with young voters. He's doing it himself right now. And I don't know how much the vice presidential pick will ultimately sway that. He does it all on his own.
Yeah, that's part of it too. And I hate to do this at the beginning of our special, but how much is his vice president? This might be the most inconsequential vice presidential pick in history too, because he's so who he is.
Yeah, well, it ultimately matters. And I think people pay attention to it. And he's taking it very seriously. Hence the reason he hasn't chosen someone yet. I think he still has a little more vetting to do, and he wants to spend a little more time with the people who he's considering, which is why I think he said, you probably won't know who I'm choosing until the Republican National Committee convention in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, come mid-July. So everybody's got to wait. But I can assure you he's taking it very seriously, and he knows the importance of it nonetheless.
You guys are running that convention, right? That you put that on. What do we have to look forward to that convention? What's exciting? What's different, perhaps, about Milwaukee?
Well, this is the first convention that has actually happened in 8 years. Because if you think back, in 2020, we didn't have the traditional conventions because of COVID. And so this is we're blowing it out of the water. We're the first ones, the Republican Party, to put ours on. It is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And look, I think it's about contrasting two presidents and two presidencies. And we do have that amazing opportunity right now, having had Donald Trump for 4 years and now having had Joe Biden for 3.5 years. You can very clearly contrast the way that they operated as president, the results for this country, the way people in this country feel, the way their day-to-day lives operated. And that is really our job ultimately at this convention, to contrast these two men and then talk about the future for America. How do you give the country back to we the people? How do we roll back all these crazy regulations? How do we pull back the inflation that has been killing people in this country? How do we close down the border, gain back our energy independence, and regain our footing on the world stage? Those are all things that are going to be very important to talk directly to the American people about during this convention. And we're really excited. We get to go first. We get to set the tone. So get ready. Mid-July, we're going to see you there.
I should end here. We only got a minute, and this is an unfair question for only a minute, but hopefully I can ask you this when we talk on the radio next time. But we talked to Rudy Giuliani the other day, and I said, Mr. Mayor, I don't know if there's ever been someone in history that was so beloved and then so just like disgraced. We hate this person. As maybe like that delta is maybe Rudy. We're going to talk to Ben Carson at the end of this. He's someone too, like Ben Carson, most brilliant neuroscience ever, and then total wingnut because he's a Republican. How do you, as a member of the Trump family, and Donald, does he care at all about how he was the most beloved king of New York and now, arrested in New York? How does he interpret that?
He knew getting into this. He actually sat down with our family before he announced he was running for president the first time in 2015. And he said, if we do this the right way, if I do the things that are necessary to save this country, they're going to come after us. And it's not just going to be me, it's going to be all of us. He knew what he was in for, and yet he still decided to take this on. He knew if he ran again, and he announced it obviously almost a year and a half ago now, that they were going to come after him, that they were going to try and destroy him in every way possible. But I think he also knew that he was the only person who really had the ability to do what was necessary for this country. No one can argue that there would be another person still standing if they were facing all that he has. And so I think he's known forever that this is really his purpose in the world. This is why he was put on this earth. And I do believe he was made for such a time as this. And no, he doesn't care. He will continue to fight. It doesn't matter what they do. He knows the importance of this election, of ensuring that we get our country back. We always hear freedom is only one generation away from extinction. It feels very real right now, and he understands that. So they can try it all. They'll never stop him. He'll never back down, and he doesn't care what anybody has to say.
Lara Trump, co-chair RNC. Where can people go to donate and support the Republican Party?
Yeah, DonaldJTrump.com, GOP.com if you would like to donate, help us in this charge. And if you want to be part of our election integrity team, protectthevote.com. We want to have 100,000 people on our election integrity team spread out across the country by Election Day. So come join us.
Yes, great to talk to you, Lara. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Keep up the great work. Coming up next, again, Ben Carson at the end of the show. But next, we'll talk to two guests who are going to make their case for Vice President J.D. Vance and Vice President Doug Burgum. That's next right here on the First TV. Spread the word.
It's election interference, and it's tying up the president from being out on the campaign trail. And of course, we know that from the polls that have come out, even from the New York Times, Rasmussen Interactive this week, President Trump is leading all over the country. And the conclusion you can draw from that is the American people have already acquitted Donald Trump.
We have to reelect Donald Trump as president. The contrast is so extraordinary between higher inflation at home and war overseas. That's the Biden record, and the Trump record of peace at home and prosperity. That is an incredible thing to run on. And importantly, it's an incredible thing to deliver for our country. So I think we need to help Donald Trump get across the finish line. That's why I've spent a fair amount of time with him the past couple of weeks, helping him raise some resources, showing up in support in New York. But it's all about getting him elected president. I actually don't care that much who the vice president is, because Trump's ultimately going to govern.
Oh, it might be him. We have two guests here to debate whether or not those two people should be the vice presidential pick. Kingsley Wilson is here, digital media manager for Center for Renewing America, and John Phillips, host of the John Phillips Show on KABC in Los Angeles. Kingsley, John, thanks for being here, both of you. Kingsley, we'll start with you. Who do you like to be VP?
Well, I think J.D. Vance, you just played a clip of him there, would be a fantastic choice for vice president. He's been doing a lot of opposition media and really making the case to the mainstream media hacks on fake news CNN and MSDNC who like to lie about President Trump's record. He is going into the lion's den. He is unafraid, and I think he is a perfect salesman for the MAGA movement. This is someone much like Donald Trump, much like Ronald Reagan, who was once beloved by Hollywood elites. He wrote a bestseller for the New York Times, Hillbilly Elegy. It became a Netflix movie. He could have just, packed his bags and enjoyed life as a successful author. But instead, like Donald Trump, he got into the arena and he fought those elites on behalf of the American people, and particularly working class Americans who had been sold out by offshoring and by globalist policies. That has happened in his home state of Ohio, and he understands how to reach those people. And I think he would be a critical champion for us in states like Pennsylvania and Ohio come 2024 November.
Yeah, that last thing you said, that's what his whole Hillbilly Elegy is all about. It's one of the biggest stories in this country. We kicked off the show, Kingsley, talking about each of the people who are maybe in the running. And when we talked about JD, we were talking about how we need someone who understands the MAGA movement deeply and profoundly and will carry it on beyond just Donald Trump. And I just found, right before we went on, I found an article, and I think it's Politico, and the headline is something like, "Who's more extreme than the MAGA movement? J.D. Vance is trying to be that person," or something like that. So do you think he'd be a good MAGA movement messenger?
Absolutely, and I think his youth would be a huge asset too, as we consider who's going to really carry that torch for President Trump, right? The movement we started in 2016 is not just a single 2 terms. It is going to take grit and time to undo the Washington, D.C. swamp that is so entrenched in the Beltway here in D.C. These coastal elites aren't going to go down without a fight. So we have to think, I think, as Republicans forward after President Trump's second term in office, who is going to be the person that is going to deliver on those America First populist policies. And I think J.D. Vance has proven he is that guy. He has been a fantastic senator, fought Ukraine aid. He has stood up for life. He has fought the lawfare that President Trump is currently dealing with. He's been a fantastic surrogate for that. And I think that he would just be the perfect person to continue this fight, because, as I said, the swamp is real. The establishment GOP is real, and they definitely want to take back the reins of the Republican Party after Trump's second term. We can't let them do that. J.D. Vance will make sure they don't.
John Phillips, what do you think about all those reasons that Kingsley just gave? And on top of that, Kingsley didn't mention his dreamy baby blue eyes. John, are you not enamored by those as well, by Senator Vance?
She made some good points, but I'm with Burgum with this choice. The first question you have to ask yourself when you're picking a vice president is, what value do they bring to the ticket? And the reality is, when you're dealing with a candidate like Donald Trump, who is such a dominant personality, people are going to vote for Donald Trump based on whether or not they respond well to Donald Trump. The days of picking a Lyndon Johnson to bring the South along with John F. Kennedy, they're gone. You're going to vote for Donald Trump based on whether or not you like him. The Jackson 5 only needs one Michael. What Donald Trump needs now is a Tito. And you look at someone like Burgum and you say to yourself, okay, this guy is about as close to a generic Republican as you get. He's a businessman. He comes from the Middle West. He's a governor. But he also has one extra added element that would benefit the Trump campaign in this cycle, in these circumstances. And that is, he's a billionaire. And if you're a billionaire, the spending limits that exist on normal donors do not exist on someone whose name is on the ticket. He could literally write a check for $1 billion to the Trump campaign that is not regulated by the FEC. And we know, given all of these Soros prosecutors and the Department of Justice under Biden that's been politicized in ways that we've never seen before, that Donald Trump is going to have a lot of legal bills that are going to have to be paid for by the campaign, maybe the RNC. And you bring someone into the mix who has literally an unlimited amount of money to spend on the campaign, and that changes the dynamic of this race. I'd also add that you look at Trump historically. He respects wealth. He respects success. He respects business people who've been able to go out and do things that other people haven't been able to do. That's Doug Burgum. So I think from the point of view of just a working relationship between Donald Trump and whoever his vice president is, having someone that he responds well to, that he respects, would be good for him, would be good for the ticket, would be good for the country.
That's a strong case. We talked in the opening segment about Doug Burgum literally bought his way onto the debate stage by giving people $20 gift certificates to donate $1, so I get 40,000 donors to get on the stage. Literally, and he could also literally buy his way to the vice presidency. That's unbelievable. But John, is he conservative? I know nothing about this North Dakota governor. Is he actually a conservative guy, or does that not even really matter?
I can tell you this. I had many of the candidates on my radio show in Los Angeles when they were running in the primary. And he had 1% in the polls. He had obviously no chance of becoming the Republican nominee, but he did his rounds. He did his media rounds out here. And of the candidates that I interviewed, despite my good friend Larry Elder, who I was a supporter of and was, I think, the first one to drop out, Doug Burgum was one of the most impressive candidates, if not the most impressive candidates that I had on the show. He's quick on his feet. He's a smart guy. And he's a guy who's not going to try to overshadow Donald Trump. If you put a strong personality on the ticket that tries to overshadow Donald Trump, I think they're going to bump heads, and you don't want that. You want them to be on the same page.
Yeah, which is kind of the role Mike Pence played as well. On that point, Kingsley, do you think J.D. Vance is too much of a personality, too much of a ball hog or a spotlight hog for that? And that'll be my last question for you. And then if you can take a second also talk about our next guest, Ben Carson, who I think would fill that Doug Burgum role pretty well too. Not the money part, but just the taking the second stage part.
Absolutely. Listen, I don't think that Doug Burgum would be a bad choice by any means. I think he would be a great choice. And I think, President Trump does definitely appreciate his background as a businessman. But I would just say that I think a lot of the points that are made in Doug Burgum's favor also apply to J.D. Vance. I don't think J.D. Vance is a billionaire, but I believe he's a millionaire, very successful venture capitalist, has a lot of experience, as I said, both in media as an author and having that movie written about his book, but also in the business sector of things. So I think he has that very mindset as well. And I don't think that he would be a spotlight hog, so to speak. I think that he is an engaging and enthralling senator, and I think that's why people love to see him out on the campaign trail with President Trump, and they love to see him doing mainstream media on the Sunday shows. But at the end of the day, we need someone who is young, who's going to carry that torch, and who has not just the money or the business experience, but the story that is going to really captivate the hearts and minds of American citizens. J.D. Vance has that story. He has personally been impacted by Joe Biden's policies policies, right? Joe Biden was the one in 2001 who officially lobbied for China to be included into the WTO. And that really was kind of the first domino to fall in the offshoring of American manufacturing to the Chinese. I think between 2001 and 2011, in that 10-year span, we lost 2.7 million jobs to the Chinese. And a lot of those jobs were Ohio factory jobs. So I think he is the person that has the background and the story to be able to sell it to the American people because he's lived it.
Yeah, those are all great points. But John, $1 billion is a lot of money. Do you have any thoughts on Ben Carson, as we're going to talk to him in a minute?
Ben Carson is a very popular figure in conservative politics. He has served in the first Trump administration. I think that he would certainly bring excitement to the ticket. But when you look at what Trump is needing, and again, this cycle is so different because of the weaponization of the justice system and how much money that is going to cost. I think the money issue is probably the most important issue to make sure that Trump has the money that he needs to get his message out there, and these Soros prosecutors don't bankrupt the campaign and prevent him from being able to do what candidates who are representing major parties do.
Great points. Kingsley Wilson, Digital Media Manager for Center for Renewing America, and the great John Phillips from The John Phillips Show, KABC. Thank you both for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All good points abound. As we just mentioned, Dr. Ben Carson will be here next, right here on the First TV. Spread the word. And welcome back to our special here on the First TV. We were just talking about this man, Dr. Ben Carson. He's the founder and chair of the American Cornerstone Institute, and he has a new book called The Perilous Fight, Overcoming Our Culture's War on the American Family. Dr. Carson, it's great to talk to you, sir. The title of your book, The Perilous Fight, I don't usually like to talk to authors about the title of their book. It's such like a lame opening question. But out of all the times I've ever sung and read the national anthem, perilous fight. I've never focused on those words themselves. How did you pick up those words?
Well, our country was born in the crucible of war. Nobody gave us anything. We had to fight for our freedom. And we're in a situation right now, very perilous. We're going to go one way or the other. We're going to go become a country that's of, by, and by the people, or of, by, and for the government. And we have to know who it is that we're fighting and how to be victorious.
What are the spiritual forces that we're fighting against? Because that's what we are fighting against, right, Dr. Carson, more so than anything, no?
Absolutely. We're fighting against those forces that want to overcome this country and fundamentally change us into something else. And how do you do that? You're probably not going to do that militarily. We're much too strong for that. But you can do it from within. And what is the foundation of this country? It's our communities, which are composed of our families. And you may have noticed that family formation is lagging far behind in our country. Our fertility rates are extremely low. Marriages are falling apart, or if people even get married at all. And, you look at television, you look at Hollywood, how they portray the traditional nuclear family, sort of poking fun at it and presenting alternative lifestyles as not only acceptable, but perhaps preferable. All of these things are obviously very confusing to our children because they get their values passed through the family. But if the family is not intact, where are their values coming from? All those students that you see raging on these college campuses, where are their values coming from? And what are the implications of that for our future?
Indeed. Sir, you were the longest serving cabinet member in the Trump administration. That's what they say. How did you stay in Donald Trump's good graces for so long and still today?
Well, it wasn't difficult because philosophically, he and I are peas in a pod. Very different personalities, though. But it was very easy to work with. And we had the same goals in mind, and we still do. We both really want to save this country. I think a lot of people don't realize how much trouble we're in. But just as an example, you look at a country like Venezuela, that I've visited a number of times before they turned. Venezuela was a beautiful place. It had the #1 economy in South America, beautiful hotels, museums. And the biggest thing that the people argued about was whether or not they were the most beautiful people in the world. And look what happened when socialism came in. They've gone to the last economy in South America, people fleeing from there like crazy. And it happened almost overnight. And that's why I am very fearful of what's going on in the United States and feel that we must sound the alarm. People have to understand what's going on. And we cannot be defeated militarily, but we can be defeated from within by destroying our foundation, which is our families.
What virtues/values, Dr. Carson, do you think you brought to the Trump administration? Or maybe we can broaden out from the Trump administration. What do you think you brought to the executive branch of Washington, D.C. and our federal government that we need more of?
Well, I think we need more transparency. We need to be very frank about what's going on and what our role is in it. And I've always said, I'm not a politician because politicians do things that are politically expedient. We want to do things that are right. And also, if you tell the truth all the time, you don't have to try to remember what you said before. It really uncomplicates your life, makes it much easier. And having a goal of actually empowering people. And the reason that I wanted to head up HUD, because having grown up in poverty and seeing some of the things that were happening to people, how they became dependent on government, I wanted to do something about that. And I thought there would be a lot of support for that. Discovered that on the Hill, there's not a lot of support on the other side of the aisle for that, because they want to keep people dependent, because those are people who are able to be controlled.
That's a profound statement. Sir, you mentioned you're not a politician. Would you be the first non-politician vice president in our history?
I don't know that I could make that claim, but I would say if I ended up in a position like that, I would continue to have the same philosophy of truth, honesty, forthrightness, and helping the people to understand that we are not enemies. I have a little acrostic, Wayne. Hate has waxed for a long time. Now it's time for it to wane. WANE, that stands for we are not enemies. We are neighbors, friends, colleagues, co-workers. We've allowed ourselves to be divided on the basis of race, age, income, political affiliation, gender, religion. And what has that done for us? It has destroyed us. It's in the process of destroying us. I think it's not too late for us to recover and move in the right direction. Our founders used the term very frequently, the common good. That means what's good for everybody, not what's good for this group and that group, and how do we redress what happened to this group and that. That will never lead to a harmonious society.
I think, Dr. Carson, what is the job characteristics of a vice president? And it's to support not just the president, but to be a cheerleader for the things that are good about our country. And I can think of no one better for that job than you. First, correct me if I'm wrong, is there another point? Is there what's the other reason, or what else is a vice president to do, if not everything you just said so far in our short time here together?
I think a vice president obviously has to support the policies of the president. And they have to be able to work together for an overall goal. They have to know what they're trying to accomplish and work together to get it done. Two heads are better than one.
If you were asked to be vice president, surely you'd say yes, right, sir?
I would surely take that sincerely to God in prayer. My goal is to be able to save this country and use whatever mechanisms are necessary, inside or outside of government, to do that.
To go back to your book, The Perilous Fight, my last question for you, Dr. Carson. Are you prepared to go through again what the media and the left did to you, tried to do to you, the first go around? But you were just running for president and head of HUD. Imagine if you were in a larger position, like vice president, how they would try to destroy you and your family and run you through the mud when you were one of the most beloved people. And they made movies about you. Just like Trump, one of the most beloved people ever. And now they're trying to make him one of the most disgraced. Are you personally prepared to go through all that again?
Well, you know, my faith gets me through, because I say, against the backdrop of eternity, what is a little inconvenience here, particularly when we have such a lofty goal at saving this country?
Dr. Ben Carson, American Cornerstone Institute, new book, The Perilous Fight. Go get it. Dr. Carson, an honor to talk to you as always, sir. Thank you.
Great to be with you. Thank you so much.
Hopefully after today's special, we have a little more insight into what's important about the vice president position. As they always say, only a heartbeat away. Who can step into that job? Who would be proud of? And who can set up this America First movement from now for many more generations to come? The First TV, Mike Slater. Spread the word.